Well, I'd like to wish everyone a good morning. I want to thank the governor for coming out to a beautiful Windsor. My name is Don Trinks. I'm the mayor of the town of Windsor, and we are honored to host this event today and honored to send our support for all the hard work that you've been doing on this issue. And again, we are grateful to be holding it here in front of our beautiful Windsor Police Department. So rather than take up any more of your time, I would like to introduce our Chief of Police for the town of Windsor, Mr. Don Melanson. Sir.
Thank you, and thank you for coming today. Again, gun safety is obviously very important, and red flag laws, or risk warrants as we call them here in Connecticut, have been a tool for law enforcement that have been going back to 1999, and we've been continuing to lead in this area for gun safety and taking guns out of the hands when people are at most at risk from using them for ill wills. So again, this is an important tool for law enforcement to be able to take guns away from those that have shown that they shouldn't be having guns, especially when during times of crisis, domestic violence, those types of things. And it's a great tool, and with that, I'll pass it on. And I think next up is, I believe, Mike Lawler.
Thank you, Chief. Well, everybody, I think a couple of things need to be said. From the inception, Connecticut's red flag law or risk warrants were designed to be a last resort. In other words, when law enforcement have no other options to separate a clearly dangerous person from firearms, they now have this option. And I think you recall where this came from. The tragic shooting at the Connecticut Lottery in March of 1998 led members of the legislature to talk about the fact that in that situation, police indicated that we were told that there were problems with this guy and that we should do something, but we said, and they were right, he didn't break any laws, so we have no options available to us. And so in the legislature, we began to work through how could we provide an option that was both constitutional and at the same time did not stigmatize persons with mental illness. And I can remember the countless conversations we had back then with advocates for persons with mental illness and with law-abiding gun owners. And we ultimately came up with a proposal that was supported by the overwhelming majority of the legislature, including most Republicans, and after all, it was signed into law by John Rowland. And it has stood the test of time. And what we have learned in Connecticut, if you look at the actual data, there are clear instances where a tragedy was imminent, and police were able, because of this mechanism, to intervene, separate someone from their firearms, refer them for mental health evaluation. It's one thing that gets lost in the history of this legislation is just 6 months after the lottery shooting, there was a shooting in Ellington involving 3 state troopers who were responding to a situation where neighbors said we're very concerned about a guy that lives near us. And it turned out after the fact that that guy's family, the United States postal inspectors who were called by the family with concerns about this guy, all were told that there's nothing we can do. And I think that incident added impetus to our efforts to come up with a workable mechanism. It has stood the test of time. And I think you've heard from Governor Lamont and all of his predecessors that if you see something, you need to say something. It took a while for law enforcement to understand how this mechanism works. It also took a while for citizens to understand that if they see these things, they can reach out to law enforcement and ask them to investigate. It was after the Virginia Tech shootings in 2007 that the number of people reaching out to law enforcement really jumped up here in Connecticut when people saw that incident where there was clear warning signs ahead of time and police were unable to do anything. And then obviously after the Sandy Hook shootings, the number of concerns expressed to police about apparently dangerous people with firearms really skyrocketed. And that's where we are today. It's an effective law. It has been expanded recently, and I think with that comes more awareness among citizens and law enforcement alike about what to do when they see what are these red flags. And the final thing I want to say, and this makes me especially proud to be from Connecticut, is that yes, the red flag law is the last resort, but we have a whole system of reasonable regulations for firearms, and that each of these has an impact on the ability of people to get their hands on these weapons. And that's why when we saw this tragedy in Buffalo and then in Uvalde, Texas, you know, what the shooters did in those cases, their ease in getting these firearms, in one case right after he turned 18, you know, you can't buy AR-15s in Connecticut. You can't buy large capacity magazines in Connecticut. You can't go out and buy firearms on impulse, even if you could pass the national instant check, because you still have to go through a process to get a license to do those things from law enforcement, which involves, among other things, 6 hours of training and a face-to-face meeting. And I'm very confident that our law enforcement professionals know what those red flags are, know how to look for them, and that people like this would never have the ability to go out and legally buy the kinds of firearms that are used in these mass killings. So I just want to thank Governor Lamont for his leadership. You know, he's continuing a long tradition of focus which has been bipartisan in almost every instance that has resulted in Connecticut, together with our neighboring states of New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, we have the lowest firearm death rates of any states in the country. And I think that's because we have similar laws governing access to and use of firearms. So thank you, Governor.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeremy Stein. I'm the Executive Director of Connecticut Against Gun Violence. Yesterday I was at the Capitol with Chris Murphy, Senator Murphy, and Senator Blumenthal, and they announced the historic moment where Congress is going to, looks like Congress may do a package of gun laws. And it gives me hope, because what it makes me realize is that Congress is starting to realize what we already know in Connecticut, and what Mike Lawler just mentioned, which is that our gun laws work. They work to save lives. And thank you to Governor Lamont for his leadership and championing these efforts to get stronger and common sense gun laws, as well as our legislators like Maria Horn and Mike Lawler for inventing laws like our risk warrant, also known as the red flag laws. I want to tell you a personal story of why these laws work. My uncle was a veteran. He was a U.S. Marine, but he also suffered from depression. And he was a gun owner. And like many veterans, like many Marines, he felt comfortable owning a gun, and he felt very uncomfortable without it. And we knew he had depression, we knew he suffered, and he refused to get help, but he also refused to give up his gun. And as a result of that ease of access to gun and suffering from a debilitating mental health issue, he took his own life. And had we had the ability to remove that guns, or had the assistance of law enforcement in that situation, my uncle may be alive today. And this isn't the only time that we've heard about these instances. In fact, just this past couple of weeks, we heard in Manchester, a young man who was a student at Manchester Community College said that he was going to, quote, shoot up the place and then take his own life, and that he thought that his life would not have meaning unless he killed a lot of people, similar to other mass shootings that he's seen on TV. And what did the police do? Well, in this extreme situation, they got a risk warrant. They utilized the red flag laws that we have in Connecticut, and as a result, not only did they save this man's life, but they probably saved dozens and dozens of other lives of students that may have been attending Manchester College, Community College at that time. Once again, this past week, I had a phone call from a social worker who said one of his clients wanted to kill himself. Now, he didn't have a firearm, but he knew how to get one. He was going to purchase a firearm. So this social worker called the police, and the police, unfortunately, whoever answered the phone was not familiar with the law, and they were not familiar that this law had just been expanded, and said they can't help. Well, luckily, and thanks to our legislators and thanks to our governor, we expanded our red flags laws this year, and so this social worker was able to directly access the red flag laws, was able to go directly to the court and to have the court issue a protective order, which, once again, saved lives. We know this works. We know for every 10 times this is utilized, at least one life is saved. And we are very hopeful that Congress will pass these laws and make sure that there's incentive for this law, this life-saving law, to be used in 50 states. And if they don't, then perhaps the states will utilize this as well. But until that happens, we're confident that Connecticut will continue to utilize this, will continue to enforce this, will make sure that this is implemented in the most effective way, and we will keep doing what we do best in Connecticut, which is lead the nation on gun violence prevention. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm Maria Horn, State Representative Maria Horn from the 64th District. I chair the Public Safety Committee, and I just, so many of Jeremy and others have mentioned the importance of these red flag laws. First of all, that they work, they save lives. Connecticut's laws have already, as others have said, have given us among the lowest rates of death from gun violence in the country. So we know that they're effective. So I was a federal prosecutor in an earlier version of my life, and did a lot of work on gun trafficking. And what we know beyond this is that the traffic in guns is not, we don't have moats and walls around our states. So individual states can do as much as possible, and it's effective. But when you look at gun violence across the country, and you look at a lot of cities, particularly in the country, that are suffering from really significant gun violence, a major cause of that, even if they have really strict laws about protecting people from gun violence, nearby states have really lax laws, and those guns come right into the state. So it's really important, and that we're looking at a nationwide result here, because these laws, these red flag laws, work at that really critical intersection of access from a person who is a danger to themselves or to others, limiting their access to a weapon in that moment, that impulsive act in that moment. If we can stop that from happening in that moment, we save lives. So I am really grateful to Mike Lawler, who has done so much work on this beforehand, and the support of our governor and all of law enforcement, who have really taken these laws from just a sheet of paper and turned them into safety mechanisms for all of us. So it really is it's a great effort. It's a collaborative effort between all of us. And I'm grateful to be here, and thank you, Governor Lamont.
Thank you, Governor. Good morning, everyone. Before I say my short spiel, I have a question for you. Who of you grew up having to know what a lockdown drill was, or is, or a stay in place? I saw one hand, but I must say that this person is a lot younger than most of us here, right? I didn't have to grow up with a lockdown drill. I didn't have to grow up knowing what a stay in place is. The most security type of measure that I grew up with was having a fire drill. But now our kids have to grow up learning and knowing how to get to a corner of a room, how to get underneath a desk, how to get to a closet. Because we don't have the type of measures to protect them across the states, across the United States. Well, I'm proud and happy to know here in Connecticut, though, we have stepped up. We have stepped up, and we have some of the toughest gun laws in the country. We're not done yet, but I really want to thank my colleagues in the legislature, and especially our governor, and I want to thank the men in uniform, in which, I tell you what, I feel so safe in the state because they're here protecting us. Thank you, Governor, for signing legislation and fostering legislation that protects us. That protects us and it protects our kids. You know, it was years ago. I'm from Bloomfield, State Rep Bobby Gibson, and I remember being in my classroom and hearing about Sandy Hook, and then hearing about Jimmy Green, who was a student in Bloomfield at the time when I was teaching, and hearing about what happened to his daughter. Those types of things should never, ever, ever have to happen. And I'm speaking from an educator standpoint right now. Those things should never have to happen. And so I'm here to stand in strong support with my colleagues, with our police force, Chief Melanson, and with our governor in support of this legislation and doing anything we can to protect, especially our children, everybody. But again, I'm talking as an educator, to protect our children. Thank you.
Deborah Davis with Mothers United Against Violence, and I stand here with this team, with the governor and the work that has been done in the state of Connecticut. But more importantly, my son Philip was taken in 2010, and it was not one shot, it was 2 shots. So I knew it was intentional. But I also know that there are different mechanisms and strategies that we can do and help on the front line. We've worked with the city of Hartford's police department for over, I think, 10 years. Is that right, Brian? Yes. And so we've been really trying to identify those solutions that really help. We are boots on the ground. We are frontline workers. If they call us at midnight, we're there at that home. But more importantly, our mission is to intervene and attempt to prevent. Now, I can tell you that's a tough job. But as a mother with a passion and the compassion to help to prevent the gun violence in our urban city and in our urban cities across this country, because we get calls from all over, we collaborate with almost everyone because we know how important our firsthand experience is. So when someone loses, and I'm not going to say lose, because when I went to my survivors conference, they said the person is taken from you. You did not lose them. And that was really important for us because sometimes parents carry that kind of guilt. And we had to release ourselves from all of the pain and the suffering that we have to go through anyway. But we thank the governor for the red flag laws because we've worked with CAGV for over 15 years on that as well. But more importantly, I know that we have a lot of bullying in our schools. It could be sneakers, and I gotta say it, the way you look, and sometimes the way you talk. And we have to look for almost everything. And if there's a really, really, really smart young man, he is going to get bullied, and that's a number one. And unfortunately, the guns are what they're using to use the most, I know is the quickest way that they can take this person out. And so we get young people now that are suffering bullying, and now they are taking themselves out. And we found that a lot of individuals that are living in the urban cities, minorities, diversity, they are using guns more than ever before. And they are using guns for suicide reasons. This, for us, is extremely alarming. And so we have double work to do. We not only have to help that parent that actually knows that her child was taken by someone else. We have to help that parent when there's signs of mental illness. And there's a lot of unchecked mental illness in the urban areas. People don't know that, but we know that because we walk by them every day. And we try to say hello every day. And if they need help, we try to do the referrals for them. And I know that with the work that Mothers United Against Violence has done over the last 20 years, it has helped to save lives. I know that parents call us. The sisters and brothers call us. If they see something, just like the governor said at St. Francis the other day, they have to say something. That's very important. And that's what our eyes are for. That's what our legs are for. That's what our arms are for. That's why we think ahead. And so we want to thank the governor again. And of course, working with the police department in our city has been really key for us because they also help us identify some of the trouble spots and some of the areas that we know we need to really be there to support our families. That is really key. Thank you so much.
Well, Deborah, we learn from these tragedies. Connecticut's learned from these tragedies. We learned the hard way, but at least we learned, and we make a difference. And Mike Lawler's been making a difference on the front line of this, going back to the beginning. And I think you said it stands the test of time, these gun safety laws that we're putting in place, and they stand the test of time because they work. I was actually I was just waiting for the Celtics game, so I tuned in to Tucker Carlson last night, and he was sort of saying these laws don't work. Look at all the crime in these and shootings in these places that have gun safety, like Chicago. Misses the point that our gun safety laws make Connecticut one of the safest states in the country. Thank God we have great neighbors like Rhode Island and Massachusetts and New York following the lead. And now, thanks to Chris Murphy sitting down with John Cornyn, we're going to get something done at a national level. And as we speak, I believe Dick Blumenthal is sitting down with Lindsey Graham and focusing on the red flag laws and the lives that could be saved. You know, right after Tucker was saying these laws don't work, he had the Attorney General from Missouri on. And at the same time, I'm reading my briefing about red flag, and I was just struck that when we had our red flag laws go in, our number of suicides, gun-related suicides, went down by a third in the state of Connecticut. And when they ended those same laws in Missouri, they went up dramatically. I wish ill of nobody, but learn from, we can learn from these tragedies, and I think we should. You know, Maria, you know, said, hey, we're a small island. Even this region's a small island. That kid in Buffalo who turns 18 and gets the AR-15 and drives into Buffalo to commit that horrific mass shooting. They left a lot of breadcrumbs, digital breadcrumbs. And you'd like to think that he had had a number of interviews and a red flag law that would have been strengthened, like here in the state of Connecticut. We would have been able to have a better chance of stopping what happened there. I was going to say, on us being an island unto ourselves, we're not. And Maria said, look, these guns are coming in from all over. Blaney and I are driving up from Hartford this morning. Here's the sign, 12 miles to legal marijuana, 12 miles to really good fireworks. And just further down the street, a lot of guns, where they have more lax laws are coming into our state, you know, every week. And, you know, with Colonel Malikas, you know, we were right there on the front lines finding some of the biggest heists of what's going on. And speaking to Colonel Malikas, I'd like to say one other thing. Our gun safety laws make a difference. We've made the biggest commitment to mental health in the history of the state. I'd like to see that make a difference. And I'd also like you to know that we have you know, the best trained, most professional police force in the world here in the state of Connecticut. I was a little distressed to read, you know, the article in the paper, sort of, I think, sort of saying we have a hard time policing ourselves. And look, what you saw in Texas, I don't think would happen in Connecticut. I think our police were so well trained, professional, they knew exactly what to do. And I'd just like to give a shout out there. You know, ACLU, this is what you see, these infractions in the state police. These are not one-off incidents. This is systemic. No, it's not. We've got the best trained police force in the world. I'm doing everything I can to recruit the best trained, most diverse police force in the world, working alongside our mental health professionals, working alongside mental red flag laws and gun safety laws that keep us safe, keep our communities safe, and keep your son or daughter safe when we think they're really at risk. That's why we're here today. I hope we're making a difference. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, could either the colonel or the chief give us a sense as to what law enforcement in Connecticut would do with the added resources that could come from the red flag portion of the law that's being developed in the Senate?
So the red flag laws pretty much affect our special licensing firearms unit within the state police. With judicial now, family members, concerned family members, household members, and medical professionals can reach out and report these incidents. That then goes from judicial directly to the state police, or excuse me, goes to the local police or wherever has that jurisdiction to take these weapons, but it also goes to the state police special licensing firearms unit where we suspend the license temporarily.
So is there anything as though additionally, I mean, Jeremy Stein mentioned there was a local department that still was unaware. So do you have any sense as to what additional resources, perhaps not for CSP, but maybe other law enforcement?
Well, it just started, so it started June 1. So as they're going forward, the judicial system contacts those local police departments, and then they'll remove the weapons, and then they'll contact us to follow up. In some instances, they'll contact us and the state police in the jurisdictions which we cover.
What's the expectation in terms of usage of this law? Now more people in a gun owner's life are able to at least petition a court to set in motion a process that could lead to the seizure of someone's firearm. So
Right.
What are you guys bracing for?
So my understanding is an individual would have to report it to a police department. The police officers would then start the process, go to the court, and the weapons would be seized. Now they contact the court directly on a form. They take that form to the court or directly to the police, and then it goes forward from there. So it takes a step out.
Yeah. Do you expect to see this, people using this law? What's the expectation of regarding the number of people that are going to come forward and actually petition?
Well, I think if it's necessary, I think they'll do it, and hopefully, the number one priority here is public safety. Okay. Public safety, stop a tragedy and stop a horrible incident.
Governor, maybe could you explain?
Yeah, do we have any figures on how many times this law was used in the 2 decades or so it's been on the books?
Oh, I wouldn't. We can get that for you, but significant. Oh, you do?
Lawler has it memorized.
Yeah, that's for sure. So I kind of hinted at this earlier, but in the early years, it was maybe 30, 40 times a year. After Georgia Tech, it went up to like 100, 120, 130 times per year, and after Sandy Hook, it's up in the 200 range. So that's about how frequently it's being used. And in terms of the training, thanks to Governor Lamont, I'm a member of the Police Officer Standards and Training Council, and I did reach out to the folks who run the academy this morning to get a better sense of exactly what type of training is available and how much more could be added given the resources that might be coming in the pipeline, courtesy of Senator Murphy and his colleagues. And so it's a very robust training that already takes place, especially in the context of domestic violence. I mean, this is an in-service training that all state and local officers go through all the time. It wasn't that long ago we added a requirement to do a lethality assessment each and every time there's a domestic violence type incident. And so part and parcel of that, I think law enforcement is becoming better educated. But it is, in fact, true that there are some departments, some individual officers are not really aware how this works. I had my own, heard Jeremy told you an experience. I had one just yesterday where people reached out to me and asked me what to do in a particular situation, and they had reached out to I won't name the department, the local department, and they were told basically there's nothing we can do. But obviously, there was some things they can do, and that's in progress. Hopefully it plays out in the next few days or so. But the bottom line is increasing awareness both in the law enforcement community and among citizens at large about what these red flags really are. I mean, they're explicitly listed in the law, right? And on top of that, the mental health community. We found that the most likely group to report someone under the risk warrants are family members. The second largest group are healthcare providers. There's an exception to the confidentiality rules, which is called the duty to warn, and it has not been infrequent that psychologists or primary providers or nurses or even counselors are reaching out saying that I have a patient, I have a client who is presenting these warning signs, and they have, at least they say they have access to firearms, and I'm concerned. And if you read these risk warrant affidavits, which are all public information, you can see the clear indicators about what was about to happen. And that's what I look at to decide whether or not tragedies were averted, and they clearly have been and continue to be. So more training is good, more awareness is good, and I thank the governor for having this event today, because this helps promote an awareness among everybody that this mechanism is available as a last resort under certain circumstances.
Governor, could you explain why you think it's a good idea to have this expanded list of individuals in a gun owner's life who are able now to set in motion this process that could lead to the seizure of their weapon?
Because it's going to save a lot of lives. It's very specific, I think, to family members and doctors. What I read, Paul, in terms of the numbers was This has been evoked about 1,000 times over the last decade. But what was particularly troubling to me is after a certain period of time, you're then eligible, to get that gun, and 5% of those people then committed suicide. That's what my briefing showed. Maybe Max can get that for you. So it makes a difference. And I think we're doing it carefully with family members and medical professionals, just like Mike said.
Your thoughts on Representative Devlin voting against this? She voted against this expansion in the most recent bill.
Well, it's disappointing. You have to ask her. But as Mike said, this was very bipartisan, here in Connecticut in particular. And I was really pleased to see the 10 Republican senators stood up and joined the Democrats in order to make this done. It got a little more complicated in this last session. We got this red flag law through on a bipartisan basis. We couldn't do much else when it came to gun safety. You'll have to ask her why she doesn't want a stronger red flag law. It saves lives.
Governor, can you go back? You mentioned that when someone gets their gun back, that they're more likely to commit suicide. What's the time frame that they get the gun back, and who does the investigation?
Do you know the answer to that? I don't know the answer to that.
Anyway, if the warrant is issued and the guns are seized, there's a hearing that takes place usually within a week if it's requested. And if it's requested, a judge has to make a finding that the person continues to be an imminent danger to themselves or to others, right? And if so, the judge is allowed to have the seizure of the firearms last as much as a year. And towards the end of that period of time, if the state's attorneys, the local prosecutors, want to continue to extend that, they can come into court, present evidence that the person continues to be a risk and therefore should not have access to firearms, and a judge would decide. But it's important to keep in mind that there's an overlay, there's a safeguard. In order to acquire any firearms, you need to have a permit to carry or another credential issued by law enforcement. Those will be revoked once this warrant is issued. So it's not as easy as just getting the court to say you can have your firearms back. Then you have to go back and get your license to obtain firearms reinstated. And I think that's the real safeguard that we have here in Connecticut. And don't forget, that applies not just to buying guns, but also even to buying ammunition in the first place. So we have a multi-layered approach here. And as I said, the red flag is the last resort if you have no other options, but it's a real option and it does work.
Excuse me, I thought one of the changes that took effect was that there's going to be a hearing, there's an option every 6 months for someone to get their firearms back, no longer a year.
Could be, it could be. But either way, I mean, if a person continues to be dangerous, they're going to be extended. But the bottom line is they're not going to have they're not going to be allowed to accept any gun because they won't have the credential.
One of the compromises made in expanding this law, maybe Representative Moore can speak to this, I believe, was giving people the option of having a hearing every 6 months to have the firearms returned. If someone knows, please.
Yeah, so the way that the law used to work was they could only issue the warrant for a year. And then after that expiration, if the police or the state's attorneys did not ask for a new warrant, the order would expire, and then the gun owner would automatically get their guns back, but they'd still have to jump through all the hoops that Mike just talked about. What the new law does is expands the discretion of the court, right? So now the court is not bound by that 1 year only. The court can issue an order for longer than that year. But built into this law is also additional due process, which allows the gun owner to petition the court to be able to say, hey, look, I've gotten help. I'm no longer an imminent risk of harming myself or others. I should get my gun back. And then the court would make a determination as to whether or not that's warranted.
Thanks, everybody.